Demand for Iranian oil is on the rise, despite an EU embargo and American sanctions on the country. The International Energy Agency says Tehran sold more of its crude in August than in July, when the restrictions came into force. The measures are aimed at forcing Iran to stop its nuclear program, which Tehran maintains is for purely peaceful purposes. To discuss this more, we have political analyst Chris Bambery, who's in London. So, Chris, it seems the oil embargo is not working. Why is that?
Well, the oil embargo has essentially been implemented by the United States and its European allies, and they're having great difficulty in even getting their friends to implement this embargo. For instance, Japan is desperately getting a waiver, trying to get a waiver from Washington in order to continue Iranian oil imports. It needs Iranian oil. But more importantly, Iran is discovering new markets. China is continuing to take Iranian oil. So is India. To get around the economic sanctions, which means the trade cannot be in dollars, which is what the oil trade usually use, the Indians are using their own currency, the rupee, but also are trading Iranian oil for rice and other raw materials. So what's happening here is Iran, if you like, is shifting its oil exports from Western Europe in particular to the developing countries, China, India, Brazil, elsewhere, Indonesia. And that has got quite serious ramifications, I think, in the long term, because actually that's a very good market for Iran, and it can afford to turn its back on Western Europe. So what we could well be seeing is a case of the West and America shooting themselves in the foot here by trying to enforce these sanctions, which Iran is clearly prepared for, and has taken very, very deep moves in order to get around those sanctions. For instance, it's got tankers which are trading with from India. It's got tankers which are taking oil to Malaysia, from which it's exported further. It's found ways to get around these sanctions. So it's not succeeding.
Add to that, I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chris, that the U.S. Treasury does say the sanctions are effective and have slashed Iran's crude exports in half as compared to last year's figures. What do you make of all that?
Well, I think the Americans are fooling themselves here, but I think they're also desperate to try and show Israel that somehow sanctions are working, and in order to say to Israel, look, sanctions are going to beggar Iran's economy, just like they did in Iraq, and therefore we don't need to attack Iran at the moment, like Netanyahu is urging Obama to do. So I think, in a way, the Americans have to say sanctions are working in order to try and calm the Israelis down, because the Americans are operating on a different time scale over any possible military attack on Iran. They don't believe Iran, which vehemently denies, of course, it's got a nuclear missile program, but they don't believe Iran is near developing such a weapon at the moment, nor has the means to deliver it. Whereas the Israelis do believe that and are urging action. So America is desperate to show Tel Aviv that sanctions are working, and I think they're kidding themselves here.
Now, certainly there are other oil suppliers. Can they not keep up with the demand?
Well, there is a constant demand for oil, but also what we're seeing is Iranian produces some top-grade oil, which is always going to be in demand. And, you know, it's also a case where these developing economies desperately need oil. I mean, China is desperately sucking in oil and other raw materials to feed its economy. Therefore,
Chris,
if there's spare capacity in terms of Iranian Iran.
I'm sorry to cut you off, but we are running out of time, and I do want to get this last question in. Many European banks, they continue to deal with Iran despite a threat of being banned from the American banking sector. What is their motivation?
Well, they again want to make a quick buck, and their economic interests often become before the interests of their own governments. But also, there is money to be made in Iran. Iran is a major economy. This is not like Iraq was under Saddam Hussein when the economy was destroyed. Iran is a major world economy, a world player. And actually, if Europe loses out on its economic trade and economic contacts in Tehran, these new other economies are going to step in and fill the breach. And therefore, in Europe, there is a fear it's going to be excluded from the Iranian market as a result of these sanctions. And I think that is actually what's going to happen.
All right. Chris Bambery in London, thank you for your time, political analyst.
Thank you.